My parents expect me to be my handicapped sister's slave for the rest of my life because I was put here to be her caretaker. Now, they don't know what to do because I won't be coming back home. My sister is severely autistic. She requires attention almost 24/7 and cannot be left alone. She is nonverbal and cannot take care of herself at all. Despite being only 12, she is extremely destructive and violent, destroying anything she gets her hands on. I hate her. That should feel wrong to say, but it doesn't. I was only 6 years old when she was born, and since then, I've never solely had my parents' attention. Even as far back as I can remember, the world has revolved around her. I was moved out of my room into the basement at 7 because she needed to be in the room next to my parents. All of my toys as a child were destroyed by her, and my parents simply ignored me when I complained. Even when I was 14 and she destroyed a MacBook my school gave me, I was somehow in the wrong. Along with this, I am expected to take care of her and drop everything I do for her. I can never make plans with friends because my parents expect me to be there if they need me to take care of her. Even when I do somehow get time to myself, I am required to leave if they call on me. If I don't, I am punished. A recent example is when I went to see the new Spider-Man movie and was grounded because I turned my phone off in the theater. It seems as if I am nothing more than a slave to them, and anything involving her completely overshadows me. This past week, I was chosen to give a speech at a school event. I was so excited, and my parents promised to be there, but they never showed up. They claimed it was because of my sister. Anytime something important happens for me, they are too busy with her. I've held this in for so long, and it finally spilled out today while talking about colleges with my father. He joked that I should get a degree that pays well so that when they're gone, I can take care of my sister. I don't know why, but this caused me to break down. I cried and screamed about how it's always about her, how I'm nothing more than a caretaker to them, and how I am expected to be her slave for the rest of my life. I've locked myself in my room since then, and my parents haven't come to check on me. Am I the a-hole here? Update 1. After thinking about it for these past hours, I realize you are right. I don't despise my sister. It's not her fault that she was born the way she is. My parents came to talk to me a while after my breakdown, but I was unable to bring myself to talk to them and only cried, asking them to leave. They have made arrangements with my grandfather for me to stay with him for the time being, and I'm getting ready to go to his house. My parents want to talk to me, but we've decided it's best I leave for now to have some space and time to collect myself. We will sit down and talk later this week about this issue. Update 2. Since the day I made the post, I've been staying with my grandfather. This week has been a huge change for me, both for better and for worse. I told my grandpa the story of why I broke down, and, to be honest, he seemed horrified. No one in my family knew my parents were essentially using me as a free care service for my sister. My grandpa told me some things I don't feel comfortable repeating, but essentially my sister is supposed to be getting care from a professional, and my parents have been ignoring that. Along with this, I was not supposed to be caring for her at all. With her mental state, she is a danger to herself and others. My grandpa told me not to contact my parents without him present. The rest of the week consisted of other family members checking in on me and telling me things my parents had hidden. This included the fact that my parents have been taking money from family members to fund a caretaker that doesn't exist. Despite everything, my extended family has shown me more love this week than I've felt in a long time. My grandfather encouraged me to spend time with friends and do things I want to do. On Saturday night, I sat down with my parents to talk. It went badly, to say the least. They admitted to many things, but did not apologize. My father even said, "You were put here to be her caretaker." I confronted them about the money and the professional care my sister needed, but they denied or made excuses for everything. After discussing it with my grandfather and uncle, I decided not to go back. When I graduate high school, I plan to leave the state for college. My aunt has said that the money she was sending to my parents will now go to me. My parents have called me twice since Saturday, but neither call was to apologize. They only asked when I was coming home. Update 3. We just got back from moving my things out of my parent house. My grandpa and uncle helped me gather everything I wanted to take. I have my birth certificate, social security card, and all other important documents. My dad left with my sister shortly after I arrived, and my mom hovered silently as I packed. As we were leaving, my mom broke down and told me she loved me and would miss me. I hugged her and said goodbye. Even now, I wonder if she really meant it. After this whole week of her not saying anything, she waited until the very end. Right now, I think I just need to look ahead. Maybe one day my parents and I can reconnect. I hope so. I've learned something I wish I had realized earlier. I don't hate my sister. In fact, I love her with all my heart. I should never have projected my hatred onto her. That was wrong, and someday I hope to make up for it. But for now, I need to leave.
I was discriminated against all my life because of my golden child sister. Finally, I got my sweet revenge on my wedding day. I faced discrimination my entire life because of my golden child sister, and she even tried to walk down the aisle at my wedding. Finally, I got my revenge. My parents always favored my sister, and it was far from subtle. If she accused me of something, they'd believe her and punish me. But if I accused her, even with undeniable proof, they'd give her a lighter punishment and find a way to scold me too. My birthday cake always had to be her favorite flavor, and my parents pretend they didn't know I hated it. They always bought her more than me and took us where she wanted, even if it was supposed to be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and used me as a punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but things got worse when we were teens. She ended up with no friends, and her behavior deteriorated. Did her friends move away or ditch her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close. My parents boasted about her achievements, but never mentioned any issues, whereas they constantly highlighted my flaws as teasing material. I only knew she had no friends because we went to the same school, and I noticed she was no longer with people. Meanwhile, I was fairly popular. My sister realized this and suddenly turned me from an occasional punching bag to someone she needed to take down constantly. She started accusing me and my friends of more things. My parents stopped letting me hang out with anyone, with excuses like, "They're not good people according to your sister," or, "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from complete isolation was my extended family. Most of them lived in the same hometown, and I got along well with my cousins despite some age differences. At one gathering, they invited me to something. I don't remember what, and I sadly replied that I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. When asked why, my kids self-bluntly said it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. This got back to the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart later. I was scolded for lying and grounded for a month, but after that, they gave me some leeway, so it was worth it. My sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of our extended family knowing her social status was too much, so she demanded to switch, and my parents immediately obliged. Even though it cost them more since the school was further away, she made friends at the new school. However, she never went back to mostly ignoring me. Having felt the power to mess with me, and being angry that I told the family she had no friends, she never let me go. My life remained difficult. Her friends would come over and bully me, which my parents called light teasing. I never invited friends over because my parents were awful hosts or my sister would accuse them of stealing, and my parents would believe her. I did become close to my cousins, though, as my parents never dared to treat family that way. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. At one point we were separated, and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. She came over in skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different story, that my boyfriend had tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused since she couldn't do that to me. Guess who my parents believed? My boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him for a mean reason. Remember, I was a teen suffering from unfair treatment. I was very resentful and moody and hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were overweight and liked showing love via food, giving more food, buying treats, etc. My sister was also overweight, whereas I was not. I've always been kinda skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister, even then, was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand, and my parents would deliver. Added to that, the fact that she didn't look like some sexy model, even my self-conscious teen self didn't believe my boyfriend would try and cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard, and the relationship ended. I did get another boyfriend, but again, my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again, my parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened again, but they decided that I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo-Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I would eventually get called slut in high school as I was fine with making out with boys and such, but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was and why I couldn't be like my sister and find myself someone like that. Until he stopped showing up, and suddenly he was a conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well, and the unequal treatment continued. At this time, she had more spending money, and her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time, while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older, but when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had, and when I pointed it out, they denied they ever said that or claimed it was because I couldn't be trusted like she was, using my sister's accusations against my boyfriends and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it's time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college, not a very well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, because only her achievements were told to me. I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school, though, because whenever she got a B, we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents naturally made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend, and somehow stuff kept missing from my room, or some other issue she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me that since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine, so it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and wait until my sister finished university to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills and rent. I pointed out that I could get student loans. Mom said yes, except no, because they were so caring towards me, and I had such bad judgment that they would decide if a college was worth my getting into debt or not. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore and never believed in my capabilities anyway. I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said okay. My mom clearly didn't expect that and kept prying. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they have an excuse to never pay for my college, but I said nothing except that I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I never had any expectations toward my education. I knew they would find an excuse to not pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they would eventually pay if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out, my friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did, because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came, and I worked my ass off and got scholarship, not to anywhere like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school, but it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via my parents, I put my achievement on social media at the same time I told them, even forcing myself to thank them in the post. Now they couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to the family why not. Initially, they were even a little proud and boasted about it, and then I guess my sister got to them, and they changed gears and even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip that my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy, but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them, and my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because, again, they'd have made a fanfare about it. She moved back home, paying no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, obviously thanks my mom pulling strings. This was all presented to me as a point of pride. Almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people who say, if I were in that situation, I'd have done something. My husband is the type who actually does. I'm the type who's meek and a doormat in any situation, and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something, had thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person who can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy who claps back immediately. He loves drama and loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying, because he won't forgive and forget. He's just doing something worse for revenge. He's the one who wanted me to post here, and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled that I got together with him, but just because I was incapable of acting like him due to my upbringing, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't, and he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget, as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out, and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus, there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too, if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. At this point, my parents naturally demanded to meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse, but was having a hard time. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I had canceled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in a pocket to record all. He was stoked thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So off he went alone, and excited to meet them, and came back later euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful things they wanted, babe. We can screw them over so bad. There's so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he smartly told me it was better to listen to him first, or else I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there, and instead of flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him, my judgment, etc., they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle. My parents insisted that my sister would walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuse was that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister at least had the experience of it at my venue, with pictures being taken, in the dress, and she'd even have a cake later. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge, instant karma, nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife, she's my wife now, paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that crap like some sort of great gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, methinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole list of insults ready to spew out, but something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, string these idiots along. So I said I needed to think, see how my wife, back then fiancé, would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. So my husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face, and the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how badly they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisting on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over, from ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Well, the level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us to avoid retaliation, he at least showed us that something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also at risk of getting us sued, so we eventually settled for the most benign plan: act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. The rest is mostly my husband's doing, but he wants me to do the honors. So here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and they were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents, said he probed, and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue, and, not wanting the family to fall apart, would be down to help them do it. He pointed out that I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus, he suggested a compromise. They help pay for stuff. This way, I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public with our families there, but I'd be grateful for the help they gave. He said my parents looked shocked, and my grown sister literally started skipping with joy like a kid, so it was accepted. Importantly, my husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment and past boyfriends, these words were all my idea, and I'm so proud of using their words against them. I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in writing. For any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me, while my husband and I were milking them. Rather than paying for the wedding, they lay low. Of course, my parents wanted input in everything, including some things that meant a lot to me, like the songs and color palette. My husband would convince them to let go to keep me in line, but since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was fair game, or so they thought. Here's what we did. We'd go to check the drink and menu options, and then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to try it out, and then sigh and say, "It's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we won't get the best options." Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry, and they'd pay for the most expensive option. The same was done with the photographer and flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, and then sadly expressed how I wanted some other tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers, and they'd pay for it. When it came to the wedding dress, we hit a minor snag. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, it wasn't outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look good on me. We had planned on saying yes and then simply not using it, but my mom sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof I said okay. We had to go with me refusing to text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress, so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they kept communications outside any text. We made sure that happened by having me reply to my sister when she tried messaging my husband. This solidified the uncontrolling and neurotic claims my husband was making, so they believed it and never risked anything in writing. Some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family, but I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person is extremely funny to me, and I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted to really sell that he was with them. My husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge, but he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus costs on our honeymoon, ended up having this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spent a dime. We called it back to pay for emotional damages from my parents. I think my husband, okay, he just confirmed I'm right, was enjoying the whole trick more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws. But here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents, sister, and husband had come up with was to wait until everyone was seated, since the bride always comes out late. They'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it, and she'd walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it would be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric for my dress alterations. My husband took that to my parents' place. My sister still lives with them, and showed them as proof he'd ruined the dress, then said he had to go back to me as I was raging and he needed to calm me down. He told them he'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our real security hidden initially. As the guests and my parents arrived, they only saw a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents had settled in did we bring out the actual security, a guy who looked like a bodyguard. We instructed him not to let my sister in and promised a generous tip if he kept our instructions confidential. Soon, the moment arrived. My parents got a text that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad signaled for the ceremony to start. My bridesmaids had been prepped to follow his lead, so they did without checking with me. After they all took their places, my dad stood at the entrance, waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready, to avoid suspicion if my husband or bridesmaids started texting. This friend, my husband's ally, was as eager to stir drama as he was, and didn't mind not being a bridesmaid. As soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song began. The doors opened, and I entered. My dad was shocked to see me. He tried to look behind me, but couldn't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he had no idea what had happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He left me with a mumbled, "Something came up." Gasps and confusion filled the room. The friend on the plan loudly asked what happened. I lied and said tearfully, he told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. My husband and I had agreed that if my dad abandoned me, I should say that to make him look as bad as possible. The tears weren't just acting. I was genuinely hurt and trying not to cry. The friend then loudly asked, what did he mean by "it shouldn't be you?" so that everyone could hear and spread it. Then she said, "I will go and check," and ran off. We planned this so she could create chaos with the security and prevent my dad from returning to stop the ceremony. Eventually, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. His desperate run to me made me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what had happened. Some left to check as well. When I reached my husband, all was well. He comforted me, joking that my sad face was so real I deserve an Oscar, and reassured me he'd deal with my parents for what they did. We got married without any further issues. My parents didn't come back. I noticed a lot of people leaving and returning during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone whispered in my husband's ear, and he went out. He returned later with a thunderous expression, but whispered to me that he needed to go hide before he broke character and started smiling. It worked. Here's the summary from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband that I got afterwards. My sister arrived in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in as we had agreed. He told her she must be at the wrong venue because there was already a bride. Yes, we tipped him very well, as promised. My dad tried threatening him with the police, claiming he'd never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to call the police since he was hired by us and was just doing his job. My dad realized it would be too late and tried to demand that he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister, and asking what was going on, basically stalling. My mom soon arrived, followed by others. By then, the wedding plan was ruined. All my parents could do now was damage control, as everyone who learned about it was horrified they'd try to pull it off. People started screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret and blamed my husband. When he was called over, my husband put on his best confused look and denied everything. To quote him, gaslight, gatekeeper, girl boss, LOL. He denied ever agreeing to such a ridiculous plan. When they insisted he demanded proof, and of course, they couldn't provide any. All the text exchanges they could show were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was scream-crying and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a child. My dad looked like he wanted to hit my husband, but security and other people held him back. Naturally, they claimed they had no proof because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then he repeated, "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" He ripped into them about being terrible parents and said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lies ruin his wedding. Then went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the recording as it was only for security purposes. However, some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and sister get torn apart by everyone who came out to see the drama was delightful. After years of being accused of things and not being believed, seeing them get a taste of their own medicine was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying. My dad kept changing from purple to white, and my sister was still on the floor crying and screaming. They kept insisting that my husband was in on it, but people kept asking why he would agree, why there was no proof, and why they wanted my sister to do this at my wedding. They had no good answers. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, people said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me, and maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it did feel like everyone was making an extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says all the expensive food and drinks they were eating certainly helped. LOL. We had a blast. My husband kept up the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before heading off on our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try to cancel them or something, so we refused. Since then, the three of them have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. A smart move because my sister eventually messaged me. I won't repeat what she said as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation. Called my husband a two-faced snake who fooled them for months. He wants to print and hang that on our wall, lol, and hoped, but was also certain, that I'd get cheated on by him. She even suggested he was cheating on me with her. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, my sister's messages, and some messages from my parents demanding I pick up the phone, and send it all to our family group chat. He also sent screenshots of messages to him where they called him names and threatened him. But he kept up the "you're delusional, I never agreed to anything" shtick and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in the group chat begging my family for help as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He pleaded with them to stop my parents and sister from ruining our honeymoon after they failed to ruin our wedding. He ended with a request that they not share our locations to prevent my parents from sending my sister over and claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite. LOL. My family assured him they'd handle it, and since then, we've had peace. My husband is a bit disappointed that my sister didn't disobey, so he could call her out again while tearing her a new one. We'll see if the peace lasts. All in all, while I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got back at them. Extra info. Do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will wonder the same. I've pondered this all my life, and still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for being spoiled, so I stopped trying. I've considered many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted, but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our small age difference, I think they didn't expect to have another child so soon or easily and didn't use adequate protection after my sister's birth. Maybe they didn't realize my mom was pregnant until it was too late, so they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They're not well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help, and they resented me. But that's just my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted that the reason won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted, no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I have a theory that they never intended to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates, and they made my husband that outlandish proposition. They didn't want to pay for my wedding, and didn't think we'd accept or that it would even look good for them to do it. By suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister while having an excuse not to give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack without risking my sister turning on them. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
My stepmom called my husband the poorest person at Dad's business dinner, so I revealed how they stole my mom's insurance money to get rich. I, 30F, have been married to my husband Ben, 32M, for 5 years now. We met in college during our senior year when we were paired up for a group project in our general education class. Ben was studying to become a teacher while I was pursuing marketing. Even though we were in different fields, we clicked instantly. He was funny, kind, and so passionate about wanting to make a difference in lives. I fell in love with his dedication and how he could light up any room with his smile. My mother passed away from cancer when I was 12. She was diagnosed when I was 10, and those 2 years were really hard on all of us. My father, Mark, 58M, took her death particularly hard and threw himself into work to cope. For 3 years, it was just the two of us, and we were really close during that time. He was both my mom and dad, and even though he worked a lot, he always made time for me. Everything changed when he met Diana, 45F, at a business conference. She came from old money and had never worked a day in her life. Her family owned several successful businesses, and she lived off her trust fund. They dated for 6 months before getting married when I was 15. I was happy for my dad because he seemed to smile more, but Diana and I never really connected. From the beginning, Diana was obsessed with status and appearances. She completely redecorated our house, saying it looked too middle class. She threw out furniture my mom had picked out, claiming it was outdated. When I protested, she told me I needed to learn about quality in class. My father never said anything, probably because he was afraid of being alone again. Diana constantly talked about money. She would comment on people's clothes, cars, and houses, always comparing them to what she had. Every conversation somehow turned into a discussion about wealth or status. She even started pushing my father to move to a more upscale neighborhood because she was embarrassed about living in our current one. When I started college, Diana insisted I major in business or law because those were proper careers for someone of our status. She was disappointed when I chose marketing, saying it wasn't prestigious enough. But at least marketing was business-related, so she didn't completely disapprove. Then I met Ben in my final year. On our first date, he told me about his dream of becoming a high school teacher and helping students who struggled like he did with dyslexia. I found his passion inspiring, but when I told Diana and my father about him, their reaction was awful. Diana immediately started researching his family background. When she found out his parents owned a small bookstore and lived in a modest neighborhood, she told me I needed to think about my future. She said dating someone like Ben would only hold me back in life. My father, who by then owned a successful construction company thanks to Diana's family's connections, agreed with her. He said I deserved someone more ambitious. Despite their disapproval, Ben and I continued dating. He would come over for family dinners, and Diana would spend the entire time making subtle bigs about his career choice. She would talk about her friends' children who were becoming doctors and lawyers, then look at Ben and say how brave it was that some people chose passion over success. When we got engaged after 2 years of dating, Diana threw a fit. She said I was throwing my life away on someone who would never be able to provide the lifestyle it deserved. My father took me aside and offered to introduce me to the son of his business partner, saying it wasn't too late to make a better choice. We had a small wedding because that's what we wanted and could afford. Diana made it her mission to tell everyone how disappointing it was. She complained about everything from the venue to the food to the decorations. She told her friends she was embarrassed to attend such a budget wedding. My father refused to contribute anything, saying if we couldn't afford a proper wedding, we weren't ready for marriage. The first few years of our marriage were peaceful because we limited contact with them. Ben and I bought a small apartment, started our careers, and were happy. I advanced in my marketing career while Ben became a beloved teacher at his school. We weren't rich, but we had everything we needed. Last week, Diana invited us for dinner to celebrate my father landing a major construction contract. She mentioned she was inviting some important business associates and their families, and it would mean a lot to my father if we attended. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The dinner was at an expensive restaurant Diana had rented out for the evening. From the moment we arrived, she started her usual behavior. She kept pointing out how everyone else was wearing designer clothes while making obvious glances at Ben's department store suit. She bragged about their new vacation home and my father's business success. Then, during the main course, she turned to Ben and asked him loudly across the table how it felt to be the poorest person at the dinner. The entire table went quiet. She didn't stop there. She said she was genuinely curious about how someone could be content earning so little when they had the potential to do better. My father laughed and added that real men provide better lives for their wives. I watched Ben's face fall. This man who was usually so confident and happy looked completely humiliated. His hands were shaking slightly as he put down his fork. Before he could respond, I stood up and told them both they were disgusting people who cared about nothing but money. I said Ben was worth 10 of them because he actually made a difference in people's lives instead of just hoarding wealth and looking down on others. Diana started crying, doing her usual victim act. She said she was just concerned about my future and wanted what was best for me. My father got angry and demanded I apologize to Diana for ruining dinner and embarrassing him in front of his business associates. I refused and told them both I was done with their toxic behavior. I grabbed Ben's hand and we left immediately. The car ride home was silent. Ben kept staring out the window and I could tell he was fighting back tears. When we got home, he broke down and told me he was sorry that my relationship with my father was strained because of him. He offered to try harder to fit in with their world or find a better paying job. It broke my heart to hear him apologize for being who he is. I told him he had nothing to apologize for and that I was done with both of them. I blocked them on my phone and all social media. My father has been calling from different numbers, leaving messages saying I'm overreacting and need to make peace with Diana. Some family members are saying I should forgive them because they're family and meant well. But I don't think I can ever forget how they humiliated the kindest person I know, someone who spends his days helping children learn and grow while they spend their days counting money and judging others. Ida for cutting them off? Update 1: The past 2 weeks have been absolute chaos. After I blocked them, I thought I would get some peace to process everything that happened, but Diana made sure that wasn't possible. She started a smear campaign against Ben and our extended family, making him out to be some kind of manipulative monster. It started with my Aunt Lisa calling me at work, sobbing. She said she needed to speak with me urgently and alone, without Ben present. When I met her for coffee after work, she could barely look me in the eyes. She told me Diana had been calling every family member, telling them Ben was financially abusing me and had isolated me from my family. According to Diana's version, Ben had been systematically cutting me off from my family since we started dating. She claimed he was jealous of my father's success and felt threatened by my family's wealth. She told everyone that Ben controlled all our finances and forced me to work extra hours while he lounged around all summer because teachers get vacations. The accusations got worse. Diana told people that Ben had convinced me to take out loans in my name to fund his gambling habit. That was completely false. We had some student loans, but they were from before we met. She even suggested that Ben had threatened to hurt himself if I ever talked about leaving him, painting him as emotionally manipulative. My cousin Rachel believed Diana and posted on Facebook about how worried she was about me, asking mutual friends to help me escape my abusive marriage. Several people commented offering help and sharing domestic abuse hotline numbers. It was humiliating and infuriating to see people discussing my marriage like this. I found out that Diana had even gone to Ben's school. She approached the principal with vague concerns about Ben's stability, suggesting he might not be fit to work with children. Thankfully, the principal knew Ben's character and dismissed her claims, but Ben was devastated when he found out. He's scared this could affect his career if Diana keeps spreading lies. My father has been enabling all of this. When my uncle called him to verify Diana's stories, instead of telling the truth, he said he had noticed concerning changes in my behavior since meeting Ben. He told people Ben had isolated me from family events, when the truth was we stopped attending because of their constant belittling of Ben's career. The worst part was discovering that my father had been telling his business associates a completely different story. He told them I had married Ben because I was pregnant and felt trapped. When the pregnancy supposedly ended in miscarriage, he claimed I stayed with Ben out of guilt. I've never been pregnant, and it makes me sick that he would make up such lies just to save face in front of his rich friends. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I wrote a detailed email to our entire extended family. I started with Diana's most recent lies and systematically debunked each one. Then I shared specific instances of their behavior over the years, the The time Diana told Ben he should park his car around the corner during family gatherings because it embarrassed her to have an old Toyota in her driveway, when my father offered to pay for a divorce lawyer if I left Ben, saying he had several more suitable candidates in mind, how Diana would send me listings for better jobs to give to Ben, all while making comments about how teaching was more of a hobby than a career. The countless times they manipulated family events to clash with Ben's teaching schedule, then claimed he was antisocial for not attending, how they excluded Ben from the family Christmas card photo last year, saying it was for blood relatives only, but included Diana's nephew. The response to my email was both eye-opening and heartbreaking. Some family members were horrified by Diana's behavior and apologized for believing her lies. My cousin Amy admitted Diana had been pushing her to set me up with her husband's investment banker friend, claiming my marriage was on the rocks. But others doubled down on their support of Diana. My cousin Sarah suggested that maybe Diana was right, that I was too emotionally invested to see how Ben was holding me back. She pointed out that I could have married someone who would have given me a life of luxury instead of having to work. It showed me how deeply Diana's materialistic values had infected our family. A few relatives tried to play peacemaker, suggesting family counseling or mediation. They said Diana must be acting this way because she cares about me and wants what's best. But spreading malicious lies about Ben and trying to damage his career isn't caring, it's cruel and calculated. Ben has been incredibly strong through all of this, but I can see it's wearing him down. Last night, he asked me if I was sure I didn't want the kind of life my father and Diana could provide. It broke my heart. This wonderful man who spends his summers running free tutoring programs for struggling students was questioning his worth because of their superficial values. I'm actually glad this happened. Now everyone can see Diana and my father for who they really are, shallow, materialistic people who care more about appearances than family. No amount of money is worth staying connected to people who would try to destroy someone's reputation and career just because they don't meet their standards of financial success. Update 2. Just when I thought this situation couldn't get more twisted, I discovered something that changed everything. My mother's sister, Aunt Carol, reached out to me after seeing my email about Diana's behavior. She had been living abroad for the past decade and wasn't very active on social media, so she hadn't known about all the drama. We met for coffee and she asked me about my student loans. I explained how I had to take out loans for college because my father said he couldn't afford to help, even though his construction business was doing well by then. Aunt Carol's face went pale. She revealed that before my mother died, she had taken out a substantial life insurance policy. Mom knew her cancer was terminal and wanted to make sure I would be taken care of, especially regarding my education. The policy was worth $500,000, and my father was supposed to use it specifically for my college education and future needs. Aunt Carol had all the documentation. She showed me letters my mother had written, explicitly stating her wishes for the money. She even had emails from the insurance company confirming the payout to my father shortly after Mom's death. My father had never mentioned any of this to me. When I confronted him, he tried to dodge the conversation at first. But when I told him I had proof of the insurance policy, he finally admitted everything. He had used the money as capital to start his construction company, the same company he always bragged about building from scratch with his own hard work. His justification made me sick. He said he knew my mother wanted the money to secure my future, and by using it to start a successful business, he had done exactly that. He claimed he was planning to leave me the company anyway, so technically I would get the money back eventually. But it got worse. Diana knew about the money all along. She had found the insurance documents years ago and had actually been the one to suggest using what was left of it, around $150,000, to renovate their vacation home last year. Money that was meant for my education and future was used to install a pool and home theater in their beach house. The timing of this revelation hit particularly hard. Ben and I had been trying to save for a house down payment for the past 3 years. We live in a small apartment, carefully budgeting every month, while my father and Diana live luxuriously with money that should have been mine. I started thinking about all the times they mocked Ben's salary or my career choices. All those snide comments about us not being able to afford a better apartment or a fancier wedding. All while they were literally living off money that was meant for me. When word got out about the insurance money, my father suddenly changed his tune. He started calling with offers to help us buy a house, saying he wanted to make things right. Diana even sent an email suggesting we look at houses in their neighborhood, acting like nothing had happened and this was all just a big misunderstanding. But it's too late. I consulted with a lawyer who specializes in estate law. She said I might have a case because there's clear documentation of my mother's intentions for the money, and my father essentially misappropriated funds that were meant for my education and future. The lawyer also pointed out that my father's emails offering to buy us a house now could be seen as an admission of guilt. He knows he did something wrong and is trying to cover his tracks. We're preparing to file a civil suit. Some family members think I'm being greedy by pursuing legal action. They say I should be grateful that my father turned the money into a successful business. My cousin even suggested that this proves Diana was right about Ben's influence, that he's making me sue my own father for money. But this isn't about the money anymore. It's about my mother's last wish being completely disregarded. It's about my father and living in luxury while mocking Ben and me for our modest lifestyle, knowing all along they got their start with money that should have helped us build our life together. I don't even care if we win the lawsuit. I just want everyone to know the truth about how my father built his precious company, with money stolen from his dead wife's daughter. Update 3: The legal battle over my mother's life insurance money is moving slowly through the courts, but that's not why I'm writing this final update. Something happened at my cousin Rachel's wedding last weekend that I need to share. I initially wasn't going to attend. Rachel was one of the family members who had sided with Diana, even after learning about the insurance money. But she reached out personally, saying she wanted both sides of the family to be present on her special day. Ben encouraged me to go, saying I shouldn't miss important family events because of Diana and my father. He offered to stay home to avoid drama, knowing his presence would make things tense. The wedding was at an upscale country club, exactly the kind of venue Diana loves. From the moment I arrived, I could feel people watching me. Some relatives came up to hug me, others pretended not to see me. I was seated at a table far from my father and Diana, which was fine by me. But Diana couldn't leave well enough alone. During the reception, she made her way to my table, clearly tipsy from champagne. She hugged me like nothing had happened, loudly announcing to everyone nearby that she was so happy we had reconciled. When I pushed her away, she started her crying routine, asking why I was still being so cruel to her when she only ever wanted to be my mother. Then she did something unforgivable. She turned to the other guests at my table and said, "Poor Ben couldn't make it. He's too ashamed to be around successful people. It must be hard being a teacher when everyone else here is actually somebody." She laughed like it was a joke, but I saw several people cringe. I'd had enough. The last 6 months of legal battles and family drama had worn down my patience. I stood up and decided to give everyone the show they were apparently waiting for. I told them everything about how Diana and my father had spent years belittling Ben's career choice, about the life insurance money they stole from me, about Diana's attempts to ruin Ben's reputation at his school. My father tried to interrupt, but I wasn't finished. I talked about how Ben spent his summers running free tutoring programs for underprivileged kids while they spent my mother's money on beach house renovations. I told them how Ben had encouraged me to attend this wedding despite everything, because he was a bigger person than any of them. Diana tried to play victim again, saying I was being dramatic and ruining another family event. That's when my Aunt Carol stood up and confirmed everything I'd said about the insurance money. Other relatives started speaking up too, sharing times they'd witnessed Diana's cruel behavior. The bride was crying, the guests were whispering, and Diana was having a meltdown. My father just sat there, staring at his plate. I ended by saying I'd rather be married to a teacher who makes the world better than be part of a family who thinks money is all that matters. I left the wedding and haven't looked back. Several relatives have cut contact, saying I'm the toxic one for causing a scene. Others have reached out to apologize for not standing up for Ben sooner. My father's business associates have started asking questions about the insurance money, which is apparently causing problems for him. Ben and I recently moved to a different city where he accepted a position as head of the English department at Progressive Private School. The salary is better, but more importantly, he's happy and respected for his work. I've started my own marketing consultancy and we're doing well. We bought a small house, nothing fancy, but it's ours. Sometimes I think about Diana and my father in their big empty house, counting their money and judging others. I realize now that cutting toxic people out of your life isn't just about standing up for yourself, it's about choosing what kind of person you want to be. The lawsuit continues, but honestly, I don't care about the money anymore. I just want them to admit what they did to my mother's last wish. Ben and I are happy in our modest life, rich in ways Diana and my father could never understand. I caught my wife cheating and my own mother testified against me in court to force me to raise the baby because family comes first, but the DNA test exposed everything. I never thought I'd be writing this, but recent events have forced me to share my story. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened over the past year. This is going to be long, but I need to get it all out. I grew up in a complicated family dynamic. I had a younger brother who passed away when he was 5 and I was 8. His death devastated my parents, especially my mother, 52F, who had always dreamed of having a large family. After losing him, the doctors told her she couldn't have any more children due to complications. This loss changed her completely. She became extremely protective of me while simultaneously expressing regret about not having a daughter. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, she would often tell me how much she wished she had a girl, sometimes even saying she had picked out names for the daughter she never had. My father, 54F, tried his best to help her through the grief, but my mother's obsession with having a daughter never really went away. She would spend hours with my female cousins, buying them gifts and treating them like the daughters she never had. It didn't bother me much growing up. I understood her pain and accepted it as part of who she was. I met Minerva, 26F, 2 years ago at a company event through a mutual friend, Emma. Minerva was working as an administrative assistant at a local business, and she caught my attention immediately. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed very family-oriented. Emma later told me that Minerva had recently ended a long-term relationship and was looking to settle down. When I introduced Minerva to my parents, my mother's reaction was overwhelming. She literally cried tears of joy, saying Minerva reminded her of herself when she was younger. From that moment on, my mother became incredibly invested in our relationship. She would constantly invite Minerva over for lunch, take her shopping, and even started referring to her as the daughter she never had. Minerva seemed to embrace this attention, often spending time with my mother even when I wasn't around. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. My mother would sometimes make comments about how I needed to lock Minerva down before someone else did. She would defend Minerva even in situations where I had valid concerns, like when Minerva would cancel our dates last minute or when she was vague about her past relationships. After dating for a year, Minerva and I got married. My mother insisted on paying for the entire wedding, saying she wanted her daughter to have the perfect day. She took over most of the planning, often making decisions without even consulting me. Minerva didn't seem to mind. In fact, she and my mother would spend hours discussing wedding details, sometimes even excluding me from conversations about my own wedding. The ceremony was small but elegant, just close family and friends. I noticed Minerva seemed distracted during the reception, constantly checking her phone, but I brushed it off as wedding day nerves. My father pulled me aside during the reception and asked if I was sure about the marriage, saying something felt off, but I was too caught up in the moment to really hear his concerns. The first 6 months of marriage were relatively smooth. Minerva quit her job because she wanted to focus on starting a family. I was making good money as a software developer, so I supported her decision. She talked about wanting to do volunteer work in the meantime, saying she wanted to give back to the community. I thought it was a great idea. It would give her something meaningful to do while we worked on starting our family. Things started changing when her old friend Jake, 27M, moved back to town. Minerva mentioned they had been close friends in high school but lost touch when he moved away for college. At first, she would meet him for coffee occasionally, saying she was helping him readjust to being back in town. My mother encouraged these meetings, saying it was wonderful that Minerva was helping an old friend. But then the coffee meetings became more frequent. Minerva started coming home late, sometimes smelling like alcohol, making excuses about helping Jake with various things, helping him shop for furniture, helping him navigate the local social scene, helping him deal with family issues. When I expressed concern about how much time she was spending with him, my mother actually defended Minerva, saying I was being controlling and that Minerva was just being kind to someone who needed help adjusting to being back home. My father tried to warn me again, pointing out how Minerva's behavior had changed, but my mother shut him down immediately. She accused him of trying to create problems in my marriage and said he was just jealous of how close she and Minerva had become. This caused several arguments between my parents, with my mother always taking Minerva's side. The truth came out in the worst possible way. One day, I came home early from work because I wasn't feeling well. I found Minerva and Jake in our bed. What made it even worse was that they didn't even seem that surprised or ashamed when I walked in. Minerva actually had the audacity to say, "I guess we need to talk." I packed a bag immediately and went to my parents' house, expecting support and comfort. Instead, I found my mother more concerned about Minerva than about me. She kept saying things like everyone makes mistakes and you need to forgive her for the sake of your marriage. She actually called Minerva while I was still sitting there, telling her to come over so we could work things out. 2 weeks later, Minerva announced she was pregnant. I was immediately suspicious about the timing since we hadn't been intimate for almost 2 months before I caught her cheating. When I expressed my doubts about the paternity, my mother exploded in a way I'd never seen before. She said I was being cruel and that regardless of who the father was, I needed to step up and take responsibility because DNA doesn't matter, family is family. I filed for divorce immediately, but Minerva fought it with my mother's full support, both emotionally and financially. To my absolute shock and horror, my mother actually testified against me in court, claiming I was an absent husband who drove Minerva to seek comfort elsewhere. She told the judge that Minerva's baby deserved a stable home and that I had the means to provide for them both. My mother even offered to help pay Minerva's legal fees, using money from her retirement savings to do so. My father tried to reason with my mother, but she wouldn't listen. She kept insisting that this baby was her chance to finally have the granddaughter she always wanted, regardless of biology. The judge ordered a paternity test once the baby was born, but my mother continued to support Minerva throughout her pregnancy, buying baby clothes and helping her set up a nursery in my old bedroom at their house. This whole situation has torn my family apart. My father barely speaks to my mother now, and I'm still trying to understand how my mother could betray me like this. The paternity test is scheduled for after the birth, but my mother insists it doesn't matter what the results show, she expects me to be a man and raise this child regardless. Update 1: The situation has gotten significantly worse since my last post, and I need to get this off my chest. 2 days after my original post, Minerva moved in with my parents because she claimed she had nowhere else to go. Her lease was up on her old apartment, and she said she couldn't afford a new place since she wasn't working. Jake apparently wanted nothing to do with the pregnancy and blocked her number. When I heard this through my father, I wasn't surprised. Jake had a reputation for running away from responsibility, something I later learned was a major pattern in his life. My mother completely reorganized their house to accommodate Minerva. She turned my old bedroom into a nursery, spending thousands of dollars on baby furniture, clothes, and decorations. She even started a baby fund using money she and my father had been saving for their retirement. When my father objected to this, she told him he was being selfish and that this baby needs to be our priority now. The situation at family gatherings has become unbearable. My mother has been parading Minerva around at every family function, introducing her as her pregnant daughter and telling everyone how excited she is about her first grandchild. She's even started a group chat with all the female relatives to plan a baby shower, completely ignoring the fact that I'm in the middle of divorcing Minerva and the baby might not even be mine. Last week, I received some devastating information from Emma, the mutual friend who initially introduced me to Minerva. She called me clearly upset and said she couldn't keep quiet anymore. According to Emma, Minerva and Jake had been having an affair for months before I caught them. They would meet at his apartment during her supposed volunteer work at the local community center. Minerva had never actually done any volunteer work, it was all a cover for her meetings with Jake. But the most shocking part of Emma's revelation was that I knew about the affair. Emma had seen my mother, Minerva, and Jake having lunch together at a cafe about 2 months before I caught them. When Emma approached their table, my mother seemed embarrassed but quickly recovered, introducing Jake as Minerva's old friend who's helping her with some community projects. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I drove to my parents' house immediately to confront my mother. To my surprise, she didn't even try to deny it. She admitted knowing about Minerva and Jake's affair for at least 2 months before I found out. Her justification was that she didn't tell me because she was afraid I would leave Minerva and abandon the baby. This was before we even knew Minerva was pregnant. My mother's explanation was like a knife to my heart. She said she had always wanted a daughter and grandchildren, and that Minerva's pregnancy was a blessing in disguise regardless of how it happened. She actually told me that she saw this as her second chance at having the daughter she always wanted, and that she wasn't going to let my pride get in the way of that. When I asked her how she could betray her own son this way, she said something that will haunt me forever. Sometimes being a mother means making hard choices. Minerva needs me more than you do right now. She seemed to have completely convinced herself that supporting Minerva was the right thing to do, regardless of how much it hurt me. My father was in the garage during this conversation, but he heard everything. He came in looking more angry than I've ever seen him. He confronted my mother about keeping Minerva's affair secret, asking her how she could do this to their son. My mother's response was to accuse him of never understanding her pain of losing a child and never having a daughter. She said he couldn't understand what this meant to her. My father moved into the spare bedroom that night and barely speaks to her now. He calls me daily to check on me and apologizes constantly for not seeing this situation more clearly from the beginning. He's talking about selling their house. He says he can't live under the same roof as my mother anymore. The rest of our family is divided over this situation. Some relatives, particularly the older generation, support my mother's stance about family being family and think I should step up regardless of the paternity. Others are disgusted by my mother's betrayal and have stopped speaking to her altogether. My aunt, my mother's sister, actually told me that my mother's behavior reminds her of how she acted after my brother died, completely irrational and unwilling to listen to reason. Minerva has been telling everyone who will listen that I'm the father and that I'm abandoning her and the baby. She's playing the victim perfectly, posting tearful updates on social media about how hard it is to be a single mother-to-be. My mother supports her narrative, making me look like the villain who abandoned his pregnant wife over a simple mistake. I've lost friends over this. People I've known for years have taken Minerva's side, believing her version of events. Some have stopped speaking to me entirely, while others send me messages telling me I need to man up and take responsibility. My mother has been fueling this by telling people that I'm being stubborn and cruel, refusing to support my wife and child during a difficult time. The stress is affecting every aspect of my life. I've had to take time off work because I couldn't focus. My boss has been understanding, but I know this can't continue indefinitely. I've started seeing a counselor to help me process this betrayal, but it's hard to move forward when the situation keeps getting worse. Yesterday, Minerva announced on social media that she's having a girl. My mother shared the post, adding a long comment about how blessed she is to finally have a granddaughter and how she can't wait to share all the mother-daughter experiences she never got to have. She didn't even acknowledge that the paternity is in question or that I'm her actual child who's hurting through all of this. I'm trying to stay strong and wait for the paternity test, but watching my mother choose my cheating ex-wife over me is breaking my heart. The woman who raised me, who taught me about honesty and integrity, is now actively helping someone who betrayed me and might be trying to trap me into raising another man's child. The baby is due in 4 months, and I honestly don't know how much worse the situation can get before then. My lawyer says I have a strong case, especially with the evidence of the affair, but watching my family fall apart like this is more painful than any legal battle. Update 2: The baby was born yesterday, and everything has finally come to light in the most dramatic way possible. I've been sitting here for hours trying to process everything that's happened in the last 48 hours, but I need to share this update. Minerva went into labor 2 weeks early. My mother called me 6 times in the span of an hour, leaving increasingly angry voicemails about how I needed to be at the hospital because my daughter was being born. I ignored the calls, but my father kept me updated about what was happening. The baby girl was born healthy, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. My mother posted pictures on social media almost immediately, announcing the arrival of her first grandchild without any mention of the this morning, and as I suspected, I am not the father. The test confirmed that Jake is the biological father. But here's where things get even more twisted. Right after getting the results, I received a call from Lisa, Minerva's sister. Lisa was crying and apologizing, saying she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She revealed that Minerva and Jake had been dating secretly for over 6 years, even before I met Minerva. They never broke up as Minerva had claimed. Jake wasn't ready for marriage or a baby, so they hatched a plan together. Minerva would find someone stable and successful to marry, all while continuing her relationship with Jake. I was their target because of my good job and what Lisa called my nice guy reputation. According to Lisa, Minerva had initially planned to pass off any baby she had with Jake as mine, but they hadn't planned on her getting pregnant so soon. When I caught them together, they had to accelerate their timeline. Lisa shared screenshots of text conversations between Minerva and Jake discussing their plan, including messages from before our wedding where they joked about how well their scheme was working. But the most devastating part was learning about my mother's involvement. Lisa revealed that my mother had discovered their plan about 3 months into my marriage with Minerva. She had borrowed Minerva's phone to make a call and saw some of the texts between Minerva and Jake. Instead of telling me, my mother confronted Minerva privately. Minerva, being the manipulator she is, played perfectly into my mother's desperate desire for a daughter and grandchild. Minerva convinced my mother that Jake was her true love but that needed financial stability that he couldn't provide. She promised my mother that once she had a baby, she would let my mother be the primary grandmother and would even name the baby after her. My mother, so desperate for the daughter and granddaughter relationship she'd always wanted, agreed to keep their secret. I was shaking with anger after hearing all this. I took the paternity test results and all the screenshots Lisa had sent me, and I created a detailed social media post. I tagged everyone who had called me a deadbeat, everyone who had sided with Minerva, and everyone who had cut ties with me over this situation. I included screenshots of the texts between Minerva and Jake, messages showing their years-long relationship, and their discussions about using me for financial stability. The response was overwhelming. People who had sided with my mother and Minerva started sending me apologetic messages. Former friends who had cut ties were begging for forgiveness. Minerva's sister even went public with more details about their scheme, including how Minerva and Jake had laughed about my mother's support of their plan. My mother's reaction to all this was perhaps the most surprising. Instead of admitting her mistake or apologizing, she doubled down. She showed up at my apartment, hysterical, saying that none of this changed anything. She still insisted that I should be the bigger person and raise this child because she's innocent and all this and DNA doesn't define family. She actually tried to argue that this was God's plan to give her the granddaughter she always wanted. My father, who was at my apartment when she arrived, finally snapped. He told her she needed professional help and that her obsession with having a daughter had destroyed our family. He announced right there that he was filing for divorce. My mother broke down completely, alternating between begging him to stay and accusing us both of being cruel and unfeeling. Minerva tried to do damage control by claiming she had developed real feelings for me during our marriage and that she had planned to end things with Jake. But then Lisa revealed even more texts showing how Minerva and Jake had been mocking me throughout our entire relationship, even on our wedding day. There were messages making fun of how I believed Minerva's volunteer work story and jokes about my mother's desperation for a granddaughter. Jake finally broke his silence today, posting a public apology on Facebook, not to me, but to Minerva for not being ready for marriage sooner and promising to step up now that the truth is out. He didn't acknowledge the years of deception or the pain they caused, instead painting it as a love story where he finally realized he was ready to be a father. My father met with a divorce lawyer this afternoon. He's staying with me while they sort out the legal details. My mother has been calling and texting us both constantly, switching between anger and pleading. She's still insisting that walking away from her granddaughter is unforgivable, regardless of the circumstances. My lawyer is preparing a statement to ensure I have no legal obligations to the baby, though given the paternity test results and all the evidence that's come to light, he says there's no chance I could be held responsible. This whole situation has shown me who my real family is, and sometimes it's not the people who share your blood. My father has been my rock through all of this, and I'm grateful that at least one of my parents chose to stand by me. Update 3: A lot has happened since my last update, and I feel like I need to share the aftermath of everything that went down. The fallout from the paternity test revelation and Minerva's exposed deception has had far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. My parents' divorce was finalized last month. My father got a fair settlement, including half of their savings that my mother hadn't already spent on Minerva and the baby. The judge was particularly unsympathetic to my mother after learning how she had used their retirement funds to support Minerva's deception. My mother was forced to sell their house to settle the division of assets. She bought a small condo just 3 blocks away from Minerva's new apartment, which tells you everything you need to know about her priorities. My father has moved in with me temporarily while he looks for his own place. The change in him since leaving my mother has been remarkable. He started working out, joined a local golf club, and even started dating again. Last week he told me he hasn't felt this free in decades. He admitted that my mother's obsession with having a daughter had been a dark cloud over their marriage for years, even before Minerva came into the picture. Minerva and Jake's situation has imploded spectacularly. They moved in together after the paternity reveal, playing the happy family on social media, but things quickly went south. Jake lost his job after his employer discovered he'd been lying about taking sick days to meet Minerva during our marriage. His boss's wife follows me on Facebook and saw my exposed post. Minerva tried getting a job at several local businesses, but her reputation preceded her. No one wants to hire someone known for such elaborate deception. My mother, unbelievably, is still fully committed to playing grandmother. She watches the baby 4 days a week while Minerva looks for work and Jake does odd jobs. She's spending what's left of her savings on baby clothes and supplies. She even threw a grandmother and granddaughter photo shoot last month and plastered the pictures all over her new social media accounts. She made new ones after most people unfollowed her old ones. The most shocking part is that my mother has started telling people a new narrative. She's now claiming she always knew Minerva and Jake were meant to be together, and that she facilitated their reunion because she could see they were soulmates. She's trying to paint herself as some kind of romantic hero who helped true love prevail. A few distant relatives are actually buying the story, praising her for putting love first. Last week, Minerva reached out through her lawyer, asking if I would consider adopting the baby since Jake isn't proving to be reliable father material. She had the audacity to suggest that since I almost was the father anyway, I should step in now that Jake is struggling to provide. My mother followed up with a long email supporting this idea, saying it would heal our family. I forwarded both messages to my lawyer without responding. The baby is 6 months old now, and my mother has fully embraced her role as grandma, despite having no biological connection to the child. She's created an entire Instagram account dedicated to posting daily pictures of the baby, with captions about her granddaughter. She even hired a professional genealogist to try to find some distant connection between our families to justify her claim to grandmotherhood. My father's divorce lawyer recently told us that my mother has been borrowing money from various relatives, claiming it's for family emergencies. We've since learned she's been giving this money to Minerva and Jake to help them make rent and buy baby supplies. Several family members have cut contact with her after discovering this deception. I've maintained complete no contact with my mother, Minerva, and Jake. I blocked every phone number and social media account they might use to reach me. They've tried to get messages to me through mutual acquaintances, but I've made it clear that anyone who acts as their messenger will also be cut off. My mother still sends cards and letters to my office, since she can't get my home address, begging me to reconcile with my sister. She's now referring to Minerva as my sister, which is a whole new level of disturbing, and except my niece, yes, she's really trying to reframe her relationship to the baby this way. Every letter goes straight into the shredder. The silver lining in all of this is that my father and I have become closer than ever. We have dinner together several times a week, and he's been my strongest supporter throughout this whole ordeal. He's helped me see that my mother's behavior isn't my fault and that her issues run much deeper than this situation with Minerva. I've started dating again recently very casually, and I'm focused on my career. I got another promotion at work and I'm planning to buy a house in a different neighborhood, further away from my mother's new condo. My father plans to move to the same area once he finds a place. Some people have suggested that I should try to forgive my mother, saying she's acting out of grief and trauma from losing my brother all those years ago. But watching her actively choose to support the people who deceived and betrayed me, and then try to rewrite history to justify her choices, has shown me who she really is. Some bridges once burned should stay broken. This will probably be my final update. I'm ready to close this chapter of my life and move forward without the toxic influence of my mother and the constant drama of Minerva and Jake's lies. Thank you to everyone who supported me throughout this journey.